Welcome to Common Filth Radio, where we figure out the mess that is the modern world, one question at a time. Email me your questions at commonfilth@commonfilth.com. You're looking at it right now. And you can also contact me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter now, so link to that is below, and the link to my Facebook is there as well. Also in the links below are artists featured on this episode. We have music by Caramel Smooth Heaven and ND Neighbor, so you can find their SoundClouds and Bandcamps below, and Dingus gave us the episode art. Dingus's Facebook page is down there, linked with the rest of them, so check them all out. They'll appreciate it. I'll appreciate it. We'll all be happy. It's funny that whenever I mention something that I'm not familiar with on this show, that I end up becoming familiar with it. Like either last week or the week before, I was asked about the movie God's Not Dead, and I said I hadn't seen it. I had just seen the trailer, and then this week I had the opportunity to watch it, so I did. So now I have seen the movie. And somebody before that mentioned Anthony Fontano, the Needle Drop, if I was familiar with him. And I am vaguely familiar with him. I don't watch Needle Drop, but I know who he is. And he ended up reblogging one of my photos on Tumblr. So now I am familiar with who he is a little more. So I looked through his Tumblr, and it's full of Michael Brown dick riding and fanboying and police brutality, black people are better, blah, 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 blah. That's why I don't play music anymore, is because I'd have to associate with people like him. But what going through his blog taught me was that the average person doesn't care about facts at all. They only care about them to a certain point. What they really care about is narrative and what fits their preconceived notions and what makes them feel good about things. This is why websites like BuzzFeed and XOJane exist. They aren't there to deliver the truth. Their existence is to make people feel good, and when people get those warm, fuzzy feelings that make them buy stuff, they click on ads, and that makes them more money. Hard truths do not make money. What results is a nation of people whose opinions are formed based on a form of consumption. People don't want to consume factual information because different pieces of information can conflict with their biases, and even the pieces of information in and of themselves might be conflicting. Because of this, facts are not feel-good, soothing sort of things. But narratives are. They have a beginning, middle, end. They satisfy some sort of expectation. The leftist expectation with respect to the Ferguson nonsense is this good black boy going to Harvard, he a good boy, he didn't do nothing, got shot by some oppressive white pig who did it because he has hatred in his heart, and he's just doing his white oppression duty, and all this other nonsense we know is bullshit. And that's the leftist narrative whenever any kind of story along these lines makes national news. Now, if the facts were in line with this narrative, it would be fine. There would be no argument. However, there is clear video evidence of this guy stealing from a convenience store and assaulting the clerk. No one is disputing that. So instead of dropping it and saying, okay, this is wrong, this doesn't fit the narrative that we think it fits, they double down and just say, oh, this is a proof that police brutality is on the rise and it targets blacks, when there are examples every year, numerous examples of SWAT teams going into a house, killing an elderly person, killing somebody's dog. I didn't hear any of this outrage when in Illinois that 95-year-old man was killed by police for no good reason. So even when police clearly overstep their boundaries and do abuse their power, the left is silent because it doesn't fit a narrative. Their insistence on imposing a narrative to situations which do not apply at all makes it very difficult for me to agree that modern law enforcement is something to be concerned about. But we have to consider the fact that maybe the police are becoming more like the military because we have a more radicalized population willing to lose their shit, have a chimp out at the drop of a hat over something really dumb. Apply the facts to these arguments, and what they're really advocating for is people being allowed to fuck with police officers without any consequence. So if that's the prevailing attitude, then police forces all across the country are justified in wanting to get tanks and heavy armored vehicles. But I'm not really talking to anybody, I'm just putting it into context for the rest of you who don't derive their values from pop culture. Speaking of which, I mentioned earlier that I watched God's Not Dead, and it wasn't perfect by any means, but it was well done for what it was, and it was a lot different than what the trailer made it out to be. What the trailer presented actually had very little to do with what went on in the movie. There were actually a lot of different stories that came together at different points in the film, so yeah, I mean, it wasn't like some great life-changing movie, but it wasn't like outright creationist propaganda that just made cringeworthy arguments, and yeah, it was all right. It's not a movie that requires much in-depth analysis, like The Believer, for example, with Ryan Gosling. That was a really good movie. I recommend everybody watches that. But enough about me. Let's get to your questions. After all, that's why we are here. This one is from James. What do you think of immigration, both regular immigration like a Frenchman moving to the USA and mass immigration like Tunisians trying to flood Italy? What do you think about different countries' actions towards third world immigrants? Would you support American politicians based on their immigration and border stances? I said on this show some episodes back that the first thing that I would do as president would be to secure the border. So, yeah, I would support politicians based on their border stances if their stance was kick all the illegals out and build a fucking fence. But that is considered politically infeasible because for some reason the GOP is under this delusion that they will ever get the Hispanic vote. What you call regular immigration, I don't have a problem with. What I have a problem is the flooding of third world trash who couldn't even make it in their own shithole of a country, whose shithole of a country didn't even want them. From a strategic standpoint, from the Democratic Party standpoint, I understand why they want this, but their useful idiots seem to be missing the point of that. Either they view it as some sick, bizarre form of racial justice, even though blacks are getting the most fucked over by these ludicrous immigration policies that this administration is adopting. Or the useful idiot says, well, immigration built America, and doesn't the Statue of Liberty say that it will give you, give us your huddle, blah, blah, things like that. And that's bullshit because that shit's written in English. That's a fucking requirement. It shouldn't be, oh, you can speak your language and come here, that's fine. No, fuck you, learn the language. And before I forget, I would like to make it known for the public record that I think we should dismantle the Statue of Liberty and send it back to the French because they seem to be good at exporting one thing, and that is their unique brand of leftist faggotry. But back to the original point. To those people, I would say that no, Telemundo did not build the nation. The nation was built by the mixing of European stocks. How can you dispute that? But they'll probably just mutter about we're all the same and white privilege and there's white privilege, but we're all the same and all these bizarre, very contradictory ideas they have in their heads. As I mentioned earlier about the Ferguson thing, you can tie it back to multiculturalism and how we are seeing its failure unfold in real time. But I don't think anybody is viewing it from that perspective. The perspective of that multiculturalism is not possible because too many cultures are incompatible with each other. No one is coming to this realization that you can't have large amounts of people with competing interests in the same area. As many have noted, diversity plus proximity equals war. And that is ultimately, above all else, what we are importing from our amigos south of the border. We're importing a civil war. But whites have lost the will to live, so maybe there won't be a war. After all, we are inviting the worst of the worst from the third world to open up their food trucks and to introduce their vibrancy into our neighborhoods. These are people who don't consider Mark Twain his contributions to literature. They don't consider that culture. But hey, take home some syphilis to your wife. That's highly cultured. As you can probably tell, my anger is more towards my people of a different ideological bent than it is towards the filth which is pouring in from the southern border. I have come to the realization that the things I say are more to inflame the people who are closer to me than they are to inflame the people who the insults seem to be directed at. I do this because my people should know better. They should reconsider their allegiances. Anyway, we got a question from the YouTube comments of last episode. This one's from Mine 1001. You've talked about sex, and in this episode, you had that guy who was considering having sex with that girl. I wanted to know, with your religious views, do you believe in no sex before marriage? I answered this comment with yes, I do believe in it, because just beyond the religious reasons, let's attack this from a secular perspective. Most people have proven themselves incapable of handling the emotional and psychological responsibilities which sexual intercourse demands. And generally, the people who are incapable of meeting these emotional and psychological demands of being used like a turnstile are women. Men and women are affected very differently by experience, as a certain writer pointed out recently. I think it was Roosh, if I'm not mistaken. But I might have mentioned this before, but with men, when we get hurt or something bad happens to us, it hurts initially, maybe after maybe the few months after the event happens, we still feel that trauma, but as time goes on, it acts like a filter, and what we end up with is some nugget of wisdom. Whereas with women, if something really negative happens to them, they carry it with them like it's the day it happened. And this is not something that can be quantified or measured by science. This is only something that you can determine through observation. And my observations have confirmed this. Observations of others have confirmed this, which leads me to believe that I'm on the right track. But what does this have to do with sex before marriage, yes or no? We've established that men and women deal with experience differently. Women are harshly affected by experience in the short term and in the long term. So, with that in mind, we can conclude that being pumped and dumped by some dude for the first time and having that just for nothing would have a very, very negative effect on the female psyche. I'm willing to bet that virginities given away frivolously is the number one reason why all these girls go around thinking that we need to end slut shaming and that there's a rape culture and feminism can cure all these things. It's none of my business what these people do with their bodies, but I can warn them of the negative effects that these things can bring. Do I really care if a long-term boyfriend and girlfriend are boning on the outside of wedlock? Not really, because their hearts are in the right place, and intent matters a great deal. I'm guilty of this myself, so who knows, I might be rationalizing this behavior. But what these neurotic bitches are doing, they're making it my business. They want me to be indoctrinated. They want to browbeat me for being a man. They want me to undergo sensitivity training. They want to impose these totalitarian measures on the rest of us because they busted their hymens a little too early by the cock of some sleazy dude in the back of his station wagon. I need feminism because I'm incapable of making good decisions. I don't understand. If what you want out of life is to be an unrepentant cum dumpster, at least get something out of it. Zoe Quinn is like the trashier version of Barbara Stanwyck in the movie Babyface. Basically, the main character in the movie is this woman whose father pretty much serves as her pimp, and she has a friend, this old guy who likes to read Nietzsche. So this old guy, he tells her, you need to use your feminine charms to get what you want, and that's what she does. She ends up getting a lot of money because of it, because she was charming and attractive, and she was not afraid of sleeping with people to get it. Basically a whore, as she was in her youth. This might not sound like a big deal given the recent events with Zoe Quinn, but this was back in the early 30s, way before this shit got out of hand. But even though this movie was old, they got it right. If what the hand you're dealt is that you're a cum dumpster, own up to it, get something out of it. But what did dear Miss Quinn get for fucking that pentad of beta nerds? Nothing other than a scandal. And a cuckolded boyfriend. I mean, if sex is so empowering and you get so much control from it, why can't you get it right? Are you fucking stupid? The blueprint's been out for 80 years. Also, what does it say about the state of femininity that all these guys are willing to fuck this hideous thing who doesn't act like a woman, who doesn't carry herself like a woman, and barely even looks like one. The thirst is so severe that dudes don't even bother looking for it. Alright, let us move on with our lives. This next question is from Shay. I believe you have discussed space exploration before on your show, but I was wondering if you have heard of the one-way mission to Mars around the end of the decade or so. Do you believe that there will come a time where colonization will be necessary for an expanding population / an overpopulated planet, etc.? Oh, overpolluted planet, I'm sorry. Or have you heard of the concept of terraforming? The manipulation of another planet's surface / environment to produce another Earth. I know it sounds a little like playing God kind of thing, but basically I'd like to hear your opinion on space colonization. Last time I answered a question like this, I'd say that I'd much rather have Western nations funneling their money into something like space exploration rather than on the welfare state, which really doesn't do anything. It doesn't expand our civilization. It doesn't increase our knowledge of the universe. It just keeps alive that which will never produce anything. How many welfare recipients have gone on to be astronauts? Not many. And it's only the worst dysgenic filth among us that really creates these environmental problems. Who are having the most babies? Stupid people. Which nations have the most pollution? Third world nations, full of these types of people. So if we ever got to a point where we would need space exploration to escape Earth, we wouldn't have anybody left smart enough to figure out how to get there. Civilization has been reduced to who can give the most give-me-dats to the worst among us, the weakest, the least worthy. But let's, for the sake of argument, pretend that something like space exploration, which would bring our civilization to new heights, let's pretend that that is not being siphoned off of to fund the welfare state. Given academia's slavish devotion to diversity and inclusion, they would look at these projects and say, well, why aren't there any people of color making inputs on how to terraform or travel to new planets? I don't know if you guys watched the Red Bull sponsored jump from space, where the Daredevil guy he did a free fall from space. And during the live broadcast, they showed footage of him falling out of space into Earth, and they showed the control room. And in the control room, I noticed something. There was not one that I could identify. Not one person of color. All pale faces, mostly male. Given the current state of the public sector, that homogeny would be the first thing to go. They would say, oh, all these people, they're on the same page, they're of the same intellect, roughly, and they're all working together towards the same goal because they're on the same page. Nah, that's got to go. You need more diversity. See, it doesn't matter to them what is accomplished. It matters who it's accomplished by. And they don't like who it's accomplished by because it doesn't fit their worldview. So they'll handicap the potential accomplishments for the sake of shoehorning in something that has no business being shoehorned in. So, in short, space exploration would be a wonderful thing. It would capture the imaginations of everyone, far and wide. But, if you look at it from every angle, is it possible culturally? Absolutely not. This next one is more of a comment, criticism of some things that I've said, rather than a question, even though there's a question in here. It's one of few criticisms I've received that has not been oriented around a baseless insult like gay or virgin or something. But anyway, it goes like this, and it is from Austin. With all the disturbing, fucked up things in the world, why take such an objectionable stance to the point of pedagogy to people's religious choices? I understand Christian morals may lead some in the right direction, but just as atheism can blind people or keep them ignorant, so can Christianity, Islam, et al. It just seems to me that since you're in a good place where you can influence people's thoughts or actions, you should refrain from unintended consequences of your words. I had a friend recently tell me that he had a conversation. He showed me the conversation. He believes in God, and he was arguing with some atheist types, and they were making the typical arguments of why does God allow evil, and why do people use religion as a weapon, and all these sort of stock answers that we've always heard from these people. So my friend responded like this. Religion is a catalyst, much like politics, through which bad people attempt to justify their actions. Place faith in whatever you want, but understand that religion is not your enemy. Now, the end part of that statement, you might think affirms what you're saying, that it doesn't matter which religion you follow as long as you're following some kind of higher power. I disagree, and here's why. Keep in mind about what my friend said about bad people using whatever it is they want to use to get whatever they want. Keep that in mind. That speaks to the natural state of human nature, which is flawed and imperfect. Take what Judaism says about human nature. There are two different kinds of impulses that humans have. This is from religionfacts.com. The two yads the rabbis explain stand for the two impulses found in humans, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Ra. According to this view, the Yetzer Tov is the moral conscience that reminds a person of God's law when one considers a specific action or choice. The Yetzer Ra is the impulse to satisfy one's own needs and desires. There is nothing intrinsically evil about the Yetzer Ra as it was created by God and is natural to humankind. The article goes on to argue that this aspect is, these impulses are what leads us to start families and eat food and all these other things that sustain us, but I disagree. It has very little, these sorts of impulses have very little to do with what dwells within the hearts of man. Matthew 15:18 through 19 says this, "But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. Man is inherently wicked, and they will use any means they have to get what they want, born out of this wickedness." So it is no fault of Christianity's, in and of itself, that man uses it to justify whatever actions he wants to justify, because in his heart, he is wicked. And this is what separates it from the other religions, is that it offers a way out. It offers a way out from the filth. Judaism and Islam only make rationalizations to reframe sin as virtue. To the rest of the world, salvation is something that can be done not in and of yourself, but through doing things like avoiding certain foods, wiping with a certain hand, whatever. But despite these rules, you're still allowed to be the same shithead on the inside as you always were. Christians like to argue, are we saved through faith or are we saved through actions? We're saved through truth. We have to change our hearts. That bile we feel in the middle of our bodies, that hatred we feel towards something or somebody, that impulse, that icky, gross impulse that we have, it can only go away if we not think, what would Jesus do, but what would Jesus feel? You can do everything by the book. Love thy neighbor, tithe a certain percentage of your money, help the poor, help the sick, help the needy. But if your heart is the same as it's always been, if the feelings you have towards everything remain the same, those actions mean nothing. So yes, religion can keep people blind and ignorant. But there are a lot of wrong people out there. Christianity, in everything that I've researched, all the information I've gathered, offers the only way out of this. I cannot control whether or not people take it to heart, but I can only pray that they do. I was sent a couple more questions about religion, so let's get through those. This question is from Axel. I consider myself to be an agnostic, but what really holds me back to profess any kind of faith is the contradiction that most of the current religions suffer, which is that how can a benevolent God allow evil tyrants such as Caligula, Stalin, or Hitler to take control or influence over nations? Do you think that this means that evil or suffering is part of God's plan for humanity, or that this means that these tyrants are some sort of adversity that God sent and expect us to overcome? My own opinion is that if there would be a God, it would be a strict one, which maybe allows or maybe even creates all this suffering and misery as a means to set us in the right track, so that we may evolve both spiritually and mentally as a species. I think you have a pretty correct position on God intending for us to suffer so that we turn to Him. Easy lives lead to decadent lives, which are satanic. Christianity is the cure for the faulty state of the human condition. It's a religion of the cross. It's not supposed to be easy. Christ suffered quite a bit in his final moments here on earth. He made the ultimate sacrifice and he felt all of it. Most people have to make mistakes in order to realize what suffering feels like and what joy feels like. It's true that most of our problems are self-inflicted, but that's because most people are too stupid to realize that other people have been probably in a situation and they could probably seek that advice to avoid repeating that same mistake. But they can't view themselves generally in other people. They need an authority, a higher power to guide them. And that's where religion comes in. Religion provides this counterpoint to the mistakes we've made. It gives us salvation from the mistakes that we've made. By our earthly standards, the dictators that you cited in your question, they are brutal. But compared to God in the Old Testament, no human could even come close to inflicting that kind of wrath upon a people. So that's another thing to consider when thinking about why God makes us suffer. It could be a lot worse. We should be thankful that God does not consider us so far gone that he needs to do something like that again. Most days I think that we're getting to Sodom and Gomorrah levels, but I'm probably wrong about that. Alright, next religion question. This one's from Ari. Do you think religion is going to be able to make it for another 50 years? Any contenders? Judaism having been ruined by Zionism, Catholicism just failing to adapt to anything past the wheel culturally, and Islam having been destroyed by ISIS or just the Middle East in general. I believe that religion will never go away because it's the only reliable means by which to organize massive amounts of people. States have tried to destroy religion, but those religions have outlasted virtually every state as we know it. Even the states that we don't know, religion has outlasted them. Boundaries will change, demographics will change, but God will never change. The part that interests me most about your question, though, is the statement you made about Zionism and Judaism. You said Judaism has been ruined by Zionism. I actually think that Judaism and Zionism are quite opposed to each other. Jews are an inherently parasitic and infiltrating race, and you cannot be an infiltrator or a parasite upon your own nation. You have to build it first in order for that to happen. Now that Israel has been established for a while, you might come to expect that the elite Jews would go over to Israel and siphon off the wealth, but elite Jews live in America. They live in New York City. They live in Florida. They live in Southern California. They don't live in Tel Aviv. And look at Israel itself. Their government is quite dependent on the charity of the American taxpayer. So I find the idea of a Jewish homeland being a part of Judaism I think it's weird. I mean, their religion tells them that all non-Jews are to serve Jews. So there's a reason why they've been kicked out of every place that they've tried to settle down in. But I'm about to start repeating myself. I think I cannot make it any clearer than that. So, and that's it for the religion questions. If you've been bored or offended at anything, and you're still listening, I thank you for listening, and your patience will be rewarded because we're about to talk about some other stuff. This question is from Snoopy. You can like them on Facebook because they are a Facebook page, and the question goes like this. You said in a previous episode you have experienced nightmares and mental unsettlement from being exposed to too much Tumblr-type content. I've been exposed to a lot of it, and it doesn't bother me in that way. I'm just wondering why you had such a bad reaction to it. The social justice, everything is racism, everything is sexism, this is why I need feminism stuff, is stuff that I mock and I think is funny because of how stupid it is. The content that I was referring to was the gay incest stuff, the toilet stuff, and I wanted to show these people that aberrant sexual behavior was not a good thing to be promoting. And in looking for that stuff, it made me very angry. It made me very sick, mentally sick, spiritually sick. So that's why I don't expose myself to that stuff anymore, because of the negative health impacts those things were having on me. So I don't even look for that stuff anymore. I thought that I was tough and I could handle it, but I couldn't. It really was impacting my relationships, it was impacting my sleep, it was impacting everything. So that's why I just find stupid, glib posts by these feminist, egalitarian types, because, I can handle that. Don't stare into the abyss, because it definitely stares back. This one is from Alex. What single fact makes you most doubt your worldview and why? I hesitate to say this because it sounds arrogant, but there is really no single fact that makes me doubt my worldview. It's more myself that makes me doubt it. Because I see myself in a lot of people, and because, I have a lot of empathy towards people. I want them to do good. I want people, I want more for people than they want for themselves, unfortunately. No one has been able to disprove the fact that widespread dysgenic breeding is occurring, and no one's been able to disprove that the prevailing attitude in modern society is narcissism. I'm constantly on the lookout for facts, but all the facts seem to support this thesis that I have. I'm not entirely attached to this worldview that there's widespread dysgenic breeding, that only the worst of the worst are having kids on any meaningful level anyway. I mean, smart people, they might be having like one kid, but, that's not enough to change it. Believe me, if somebody wanted to prove me wrong, I'd be perfectly happy to listen to them with regard to this subject. But as far as my worldview goes in terms of religion, what makes me question that is the valid criticisms that Christianity seems to be a primitive version of what the Bolsheviks were pushing. But I think that it's not Christianity's fault if somebody makes a perversion of it. Certainly, you can argue that modern democracy and the attitudes stemming from it are like, what Christianity teaches. Instead of original sin, we have white privilege, for example. So those realities are what make me question my choice in religious beliefs a little bit. So that's the totality of what I have to say regarding what makes me question my worldview. If I think of anything else, I'll talk about it. But let's move on to the next question. This next question is from Mario. What do you think about the feminists trying to destroy the gamer culture? Because I don't fucking know what's going on anymore. A curious feature of the millennial psyche is that we need to have every little bit of everything we consume reflect our worldview. This is a sign that we place too much emphasis on ourselves. We are self-involved to ludicrous extents. So it's only natural that they want to apply their ridiculous educated, I use that word very loosely. They want to use this worldview in everything. They want to see it in everything because they need to know that they're right at every possible moment because they have a complete lack of internal ethics. So that's the first layer as to why we are seeing personal identity politics applied to things as irrelevant as video games. The second layer to this is the fact that women, they lack attention in their personal lives. They might not have a loving husband, a loving family, a support system which validates their existence. They get the sinking feeling that the job that they have is not empowering, that work is just work. It's a means to an end. It's not some grand statement. And they're alone. They've sacrificed a lot to work for somebody. So they go to where the easy attention lies. And what easier attention is there than to start flashing your tits in front of a bunch of nerds and saying, hey guys, I like video games too. This happened recently in the alt-right sphere. I heard about this where they had a female writer. She wrote some articles for the neo-reactionary blogosphere, and then she left it because it was bigoted. It's like, bitch, what did you think? So it all boils down to attention. These girls seek out these places where there aren't really many of them, and that where there are these beta guys who will give them the attention that they so crave. So if you don't want feminists and these ne'er-do-wells who really have no interest in what you like, your hobbies, treat them as equals. They will wither. If you force them to assimilate, rather than them forcing you to assimilate, they will disappear. Ridicule and mock them for wanting feminist-friendly video games. If you stand firm, they will realize that their silly whims will not be catered to under any circumstances. So they'll fuck off back to art school and make documentaries about lesbian homelessness or some shit like that. So if you want to take your hobby back and defend it from further intrusion, I just gave you the blueprint. Do with it what you'd like. Thanks for the question. Next question is from Hector. Hector writes, do you consider Ebola a threat to the West? If we keep continuing on this mindset that the Midwest U.S. has, that we'll just import all these people, we'll invite them into our homes, they're the same as us, they're better, except that they believe that bacon is unclean and that, but somehow wiping your shit with your hand is hygienic. Ebola spreads through shit, and it's usually people who wipe their ass with their hand that spread it around. And if that statement doesn't get me banned from Sweden, nothing will. Does it occur to anybody that people in the civilized world do not get Ebola? Does it occur to anybody? Or is everyone in the Western world so infected with this xenophiliac disease that they can't even notice this simple fact? These prevailing attitudes that everybody's good except for white people is proof that if you have unchecked prosperity, peace, and growth, you get weak people. You need a war every once in a while. Our Northern European friends need it more than anybody. While we're on the subject of weak whites and xenophiliacs, let's address these people who think that the 50s are so terrible and racist and that multiculturalism is a great thing, but somehow rape culture is not a good thing. I can only find rape statistics as far back as 1960, which America was still in the 50s mindset. We were leaving the old decade, going into the new one. The JFK assassination did not happen yet. The sexual revolution did not happen yet. We're still in this 50s mindset. Anyway, in 1960, per 100,000 people, there were 9.6 rape offenses. Demographics in 1960. 85% of our population is evil, white, and racist. 85%. Let's compare that to now. As of 2012, we're about 64% white. Rapes per 100,000 people in the US in 2012. 26.9. 3 times higher than in 1960. Now, before you accuse me of all this bullshit, knee-jerk shit, consider this. I wrote about this some months ago when there was a study done in Brazil, the most divided multi-culti nation you can think of. They said that if a woman gets raped, they deserve it because they might have been wearing something sexy. 65% of Brazilians polled in this study said that rape can be justified if the woman is wearing something revealing. So what do these dipshits really want? Do they want vibrancy? Or would they rather go unmolested? You can't have both. But no, let's just not think this through. Let's be lazy and not consider the consequences of the shit that we advocate. Okay, next question is from Vincent. I doubt you know about this story since it is more of a state thing, but on the news it has been reporting for the past few months about a story involving a gay Boy Scout leader and members and whether they should allow gay leaders or members at all. What do you think about this personally? I personally believe this is just one big mess slowly waiting to erupt for so many reasons. I completely agree with you. Let's flip this issue around. Let's imagine if this were older men with respect to, 14, 15-year-old girls, Girl Scout girls, and having men being allowed to lead them on trips and whatnot. Parents of these Girl Scouts would be like, fuck that. I'm not having this pervert hanging out with my kids alone. There is no reason to have grown-ass men hanging out with little kids unless one of those little kids is theirs, biologically, not some adopted kid from Southeast Asia they're probably running train on. Shout out to Sam Hyde for bringing that to my attention. Good God. But yeah, for so many reasons, this is just awful, and it's sick that they're even entertaining this idea. I have heard of this story, but I had no idea it was still going on. I thought the Boy Scouts finally caved on this issue. Is there anybody left with a backbone anywhere? If there is, please let me know. It's as if nobody has any more dignity. It's as if nobody has any more self-respect. It's as if nobody has any moral boundaries. But virtue is hard and nobody can be bothered. Next question is from Jack. My stepfather suffers from mild PTSD from his time in the military. Despite it only being a minor part of his life, you can tell it still affects him. I see a lot of these people on social websites saying how certain things cause PTSD that really shouldn't, and talk about trigger warnings like they're a common occurrence. How do you feel about these types of things, and do you believe that small things in life can cause trauma in the person being affected? People who claim this PTSD, they really don't know what discomfort is. They think like seeing something upsetting happening in a story is a bad thing, and that it's traumatizing and it gives them nightmares. I think the reason they're claiming this is because a lot of soldiers are coming back with legitimate mental problems, and they see the like stuff like the Wounded Warrior Project, and they like the attention that those people are getting and want it for themselves, completely missing the point as to why they are receiving it. How does watching a movie and seeing a character experience some kind of hardship even compare to a soldier who might have seen some little kid's limbs get blown off, or the guy next to him getting shot, his friend, his fellow soldier? As a soldier, you deal with that stress, and your adrenaline is pumping 24/7, essentially. And when you come home from that, I imagine it's like what heroin addicts feel when they stop using altogether. Your brain adjusts itself to make life and death situations normal. And then when you come home where you're never faced with that, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's never. I mean, there's some exceptions, but your brain is not used to it anymore. How is that at all comparable to what these retards are claiming for themselves? It's just an embarrassing lack of respect. These soldiers really didn't have a say in whether or not they fought these wars. Okay? Be against them or not, they didn't have a choice in that. The least these people could do is shut the fuck up. Not claim the afflictions which are assigned to soldiers coming home. Just absolutely embarrassing. But best of luck to your stepfather and his recovery, and I'll send some prayers his way. I had to find more cassettes for the next episode of Cassette Catalog. Thrift stores, they have a lot of things, but cassettes they only have some of the time, like blank cassettes or home recorded cassettes. They're usually like radio station recordings, so that's a difficulty, but I think it's worth doing. I think it makes for some intriguing listening. So as soon as I find something similar to what I put up for the first episode of that show, I will upload the second show. Alright, let's get back into the questions. This next one is from Calvin. What happens if society falls to the feminist demands that standards be lowered in certain job markets? Yeah, you're seeing this, you're seeing more of a push for this because women are not content to do what they're good at. They think it's oppressive, but let's put that aside for now. People have this notion that corporations are this good old boys club, and that the board of directors, they're just like nepotistic, and they're full of rich white men who want to oppress women of color and people of color and queers of color and all this bullshit. Companies really don't give a shit. In fact, having some person of color tranny on your board of directors would be a great PR move for them. After all, diversity and consumerism go hand in hand. But I understand that's not really what you're talking about. I understand what you're talking about, and this has to do with things like lowering the standards for firefighters so that we can have more female firefighters, or lowering the standards for something like Marines basic training, lowering the amount of rigor that goes into that. Why do we want to sacrifice our safety and well-being for the purpose of satisfying these bizarre egalitarian notions? I do not understand this. How is it any form of bigotry or hatred to acknowledge that women, by and large, are not stronger than men? Men are more suited towards physically rigorous fields. It is a true sign of mental illness if somebody would come to this conclusion that you hate women because of this statement that you made, of this opinion that you hold. And the fact that some people would call that an opinion is also strange because it's a demonstrable fact. Women are shorter and they weigh less. If women were truly equal in every respect to men, physically, you'd see a lot more women in the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, whatever. If there's an ubermensch woman out there that can meet all these requirements that are expected of men, fine, by all means, go ahead, but it's a matter of public safety, and there really aren't many women out there that can meet the standards that we need for public safety. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that, so let's move on to the next one. This question is from featured artist on this episode, Dingus. Usually featured. Let's check it out. My whole elementary school life was filled with me told to be different and special, and I guess I tried it a little. But I think that philosophy is what makes everyone do all those obscene and ridiculous things we see on Tumblr. I suppose telling children to not stand out and be the same wouldn't be the best thing. What do you think? I don't think that kids should be taught about individuality and being special at all. They should figure that out for themselves, whether they want to be unique or be the same. What kids really need to be taught is how to be decent human beings because children are not very civilized. It's really just designed to get these kids to major in stupid subjects that really don't cost much. They're high margin majors. They don't have to spend money on lab equipment if everybody's majoring in the humanities, you know? These special snowflake types who really take to heart that kind of message usually don't become scientists or engineers or end up producing anything that we actually need. No one demands the services of some expert in African studies and Chicano studies and women's studies and gender studies and queer theory and film theory and so on and so on. I mean, government bureaucrats might want that sort of thing just to meet some quota, but in the real world, no, we don't need that shit. So special snowflake syndrome is a product of consumerism. It's an easy way to get money out of people. And the barrier of entry is quite low because, as I said, all you need is a classroom for a humanities class. You don't need a lab. You don't need computers. You don't need specific types of software. You don't need competent professors. You don't need any of that stuff that would actually cost real money. The more I think about it, the more I believe that telling your kid that they're special is about the worst thing that you can do. You're setting the expectation far too high. But at the same time, you don't want to crush the kid's self-esteem and turn them into some depressive. You want them to do things still. But you should want them to do it because they want to do it and that it gives them some sort of fulfillment, not because I do this because it makes me special. See, that's how you get a generation like millennials. But anyway, I've tapped that subject out for now. This next question is from Jefferson. He asks, why is Alex Jones such a huge shitbag? I didn't even know he was still relevant. I've pretty much stayed away from mainstream conspiracy commentary for quite a while now, and I've stayed away from pretty much mainstream everything, and I'm liking it a lot more because all they do is bitch and they don't offer any solutions and they really aren't doing anything good. One of the few guys that I did like who he did the Saturday night version of Coast to Coast AM. John B. Wells, I think his name was. They fired him at the beginning of this year, I believe. So there aren't too many guys that I want to follow anymore that are in the mainstream, especially when they seem to be more concerned about cheerleading for Israel than addressing problems here at home. So I don't know if Alex Jones is a shitbag. I think that's a little harsh, but it's not something I really pay attention to anymore. Next question is from Kellen. Do you think 80s core will ever become a thing? People on my page are familiar with the 80s nights that I like to do because I like a lot of the pop music from the 1980s. But I understand some of the issues people have with the 80s. It saw the rise of yuppie culture, this new money that wasn't really dignified money, and the drug problems, obviously, and the AIDS, and lots of problems, but, it seemed like the last time where people didn't want to kill themselves and they actually enjoyed living. As opposed to 90s, which saw the rise of feminism, and those who weren't doing the Lilith Fair thing were addicted to opiates. The 90s were defined by the angry lesbians with the acoustic guitars. Thank you, Kurt Cobain, for that, you fucker. So, The only thing I liked about the 90s were the Charlotte Hornets starter jackets. I had one like every other kid did. Teal and purple were cool colors for some reason. Next question is from Dustin. Do you or have you ever practiced martial arts? Do you think that learning to fight should be a priority in civilized society? Yes, you should always learn how to fight, and in fact, it's one of my major regrets that I never did, at least formally. I know some people who are training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. They're not going to be professionals or anything, but the progression seems to be pretty slow. I knew one guy, he was on the first belt for quite a while. So if I were to do it, I'd be pretty frustrated because I probably would be in the same boat and I'd want to feel some progression. I will be ashamed and take the easy way out. See, if we lived in like a dueling culture where we were allowed to kick each other's ass for transgressions that we might have done to either each other or each other's family, then I would take it more seriously learning how to fight. But that's stealing from the government, and don't steal, the government hates competition. That's why vigilante justice is not legal, is because it puts a cop out of a job. Being your own judge, jury, and executioner puts a lot of other people out of jobs too. Think about it. You're putting a judge out of a job, you're putting a lawyer out of a job, and you're putting some prison guard who presses that button out of a job. This is what Keynesian economics gives to us regular people who want to take matters into our own hands. So, if I were allowed to kick people's asses as a means of solving disputes, I would go and learn how to do it, but as it stands, I'll just stick to firearms. But those aren't good for solving disputes, it's only good for self defense. This question is from Ted. Do you think the world will do anything about the massive climate change, or do you think it's too late? I think that climate change is a bullshit concocted by Al Gore to make money because he was tired of campaigning. It's a lot easier to charge six-figure appearance fees for some limited speech at a university than it is to be on planes and buses all the time. But the polar ice caps, he said that they'd be melting by now. I just read something recently. He said in 2007, like, the way we're going now, we won't have any polar ice caps in 7 years, but the polar ice caps are actually growing right now. So I think it's all a big scam to trade carbon credits and to make money by doing nothing, by being a middleman. And I thought ClimateGate back in 2009 settled all this shit that it was bullshit. The Hadley CRU or whatever the fuck they were called, their emails leaked, their faulty data was leaked that showed that they're falsifying a bunch of information and that there's inherent bias in the research. There was also a chart released back in May. We're in September now, so about 4 months ago. According to the RSS satellite data, whose value for May 2014 has just been published, the global warming trend in 17 years, 9 months since September 1996 is zero. The 213 months without global warming represent more than half the 425 months satellite data record since January 1979. No one now in high school has lived through global warming. The hiatus period of 17 years, 9 months is the furthest back one can go in the RSS satellite temperature record and still show a zero trend. But the length of the pause in global warming, significant though it now is of less importance than the ever-growing discrepancy between the temperature trends predicted by models and the less exciting real-world temperature changes that have been observed. Everybody has their version of doomsday prophecies, and it's all wishful thinking. Climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it, is just another manifestation of it. But I'm not going to hold it against anybody for being the average person for being concerned about the environment, but I think you should focus more on local environmental issues because you're going to have to live with those more than what you're going to have to live with on the global level because it really doesn't change as dramatically as it's made out to be. Alright, I have a question from Danny. Worst fandom on Tumblr. I'm not familiar with the fandom side of Tumblr too much. I know they all like British TV shows and movies, which I have never been able to get into. I've seen a couple of British movies that I've liked, but the whole of it, I cannot get into it. It's just not something that appeals to me. I heard that Adventure Time, the people behind that, I'm no fan of it myself, but I hear that they've outsourced basically their screenplay production to Tumblr for, they're asking them for ideas of what to put in their episodes, which I just think is dumb. If I were more interested in that show, I'm sure I would be more upset by it, but here we are. And I have just realized that my text file that I read off of is now empty, so I suppose we gotta wrap things up now because I have no more questions to answer. I've been doing this now for 8 consecutive weeks, and next week is episode 10, so that's a pretty good milestone. I've never done 10 episodes of anything, so pretty exciting for me, and I would like to thank you for keeping me motivated and sending me good original questions every week, because if I wouldn't know what to talk about, and this would probably be a much shorter show. So give yourselves a pat on the back for making this what it is. So just thank yous all around. Thank you to the new fans. Thank you to the old fans. And I hope to keep growing this and keep giving you new exciting content on a weekly basis. So until next time, this is Common Filth Radio. You can contact me at commonfilth@commonfilth.com. That's my email address. Check out the links below, and I will talk to you guys next week.